let's interpret z-scores. So first, a z-score is a way to standardize data to compare data sets, right? We can't compare apples to oranges, but we can standardize by making them all z-scores, and then we can go from there. So remember that if z is positive, that means our value is above the mean. If z is negative, our value is below the mean. And if z is 0, means it's equal to the mean. One thing I want to note here is that a z-score that's greater than 3 or less than -3 are unusual, right? So most of our z-score values are between -3 and 3. This is usual or normal. Okay, let's jump in. Don't forget that the formula for this is z equals x minus mu over standard deviation. I like to call this z-score equals the data value minus the mean all over the standard deviation. Right? Use your words to help you remember what it means. Just symbols oftentimes isn't very helpful. Okay, so let's jump into an example. The average number of runs scored per game for baseball team A is 4.6 with a standard deviation of 1.12. If they scored 8 runs in their last game, is that unusual? Why or why not? Okay, so to be unusual, remember that means it's either greater than 3 or less than -3. So that's what we're kind of looking at here. Okay, so what do we know? We know the average is 4.6, so that's the mean. We know that the standard deviation is 1.12. And we know they scored 8 runs. That's our data value. Okay, so we plug these in. So we know that the z-score is the data value minus the mean all over the standard deviation. Let's plug in what we know. So 8 minus 4.6 over 1.12. We always have to do our numerator first. So 8 minus 4.6 gives us 3.4. Divided by 1.12 gives me 3.04 rounded to 2 decimal places. So because the z-score, right, z equals 3.04, which is greater than 3. Therefore, this is unusual. And it's because our z-score is greater than 3. It falls outside of the normal range. And you often hear this when if you're a sports fan. Like I watched the Yankee game last night and they scored 14 runs. And the announcer's like, man, they scored 14 runs, but is that unusual? I mean, compared to what they normally do, is that unusual? Without knowing the average and the standard deviation, it's hard to know if we should be surprised by that or not. But when you look at the data, you can tell whether or not things are unusual based off of the z-score for what's in question. If it's outside of the 3s, -3 or +3, then you know you have an unusual number.